here we go. A little bit just. Hi, everybody. Okay, we are here with the Mythic Rare, and Enchanted Tales set review for Wilds of Eldraine Limited. So this is specifically how everything will relate to draft. And we're going to record this as quickly as we can, get it up. It is okay if you don't watch this whole thing. The goal is for you to find the card that you need to know about and quickly be able to learn about it. I will have the link to the spreadsheet that I'm using. It's going to be hosted on playingmtg.com and also just on in the episode description. So if you have any questions or you just want a quick reference, you can go ahead and look at it. I use a slightly different system from other streamers. I go on a scale of 1 to 10, where a 1 is a card you should never play, or you should do your best not to play. It's filler. Your deck's gonna have lots of 3s. Don't worry about it. A 4 is a card that is above average in that given slot or doing that specific role. A 5 is a strong card. Play as many 5s as you can. 6 is a card that you should always play in a given color. 7 is a reason to play that color. And 8 is a card you should do your best to make fit. Don't destroy your deck over it, but it really does help. 9 is a card you should always play. A 9 is very rare. There are a few occasions where it's like, okay, I don't know if I want to add green for this busted 6-drop. And a 10 is a card that wins a game. 10 is very rare. Instead of just giving a card a rating flat out, I give a card a normal rating, an average rating, then a floor and a ceiling, and the amount of effort it takes to raise you from that floor to a ceiling. If a card is a very high ceiling, don't play it unless you have other cards or a way or a reason to raise it up. Turn on my mic. Teensy bit. All right, so now you should be able to hear me a little bit better. So a card can have a very high effort, something you build around, or something you sideboard, or something that's very situational, or no effort at all, something you should just play without worrying too much. Your goal is always going to be to get the card as high as you can, as close to that ceiling as you can, and if you can't get to that ceiling or the ceiling is very low, don't bother. We are going to be addressing the rare cards, the mythic rare cards, and the Enchanted Tales today. The Enchanted Tales are the bonus sheet for Wilds of Eldraine. The ratings will be much higher on these cards. There's going to be more build-arounds. There's going to be more general things to do. And just as an aside, the white commons and uncommons are pretty weak in this set. The white rares are busted. The white rares are very good. So the numbers will be higher than the commons and uncommons, and this is going to be a lot of fun. There's a lot of really cool cards in this set. All right. So really quick, let's get that set up, and I'm just going to scooch over, turn the chat back on, and here we go. Oh, and if you have any questions, I will be answering questions, taking comments, talking to people after each card. I'm going to talk about the card first, and then we will talk about what I can do for you. If you have something that you want to push back on or argue with me, please do. It's not going to be stupid. Either I will have something, I will argue with you, or I will tell you I'm wrong and change the rating. And either way, everyone gets better information, and that's the goal. I'm going to go a little fast, because if I can finish the first half of this in under 90 minutes, then we will do the whole thing tonight. That is white, blue, black, red, green, uncommon, or lands, artifacts, and multicolored. But we'll see where we are at the end of the black cards. Oh, and I don't differentiate between mythic rares, and Enchanted Tales. They're all going to be right here. All right, so up first we have a Tale for the Ages. 2 mana to give 1 creature +2/+2 is weak. 2 mana to give 2 creatures +2/+2 is solid. That's a total of 4 stats. 2 mana to give every creature in your deck +2/+2 is very strong. So I gave it a 4. That floor with a 3, that's if it's just got a few auras. If you build your deck around, this is the strong build around, you can get up to that ceiling of a 6. It's a pretty cool card. I'll take it early a lot, but it's not going to fit into every deck for free. There are 29 role makers in this set, so don't pay attention to just specifically your auras. It's not a free include, but it's quite strong in a lot of the decks in the format. Archon of the Wild Rose. So your worst case scenario with this card is a 4 mana 4/4 flying. That is a 5. That is solid. A 4/4 flyer is hard to kill in this set and is a good attacker. Often this has something akin to haste, because you'll play this card with one creature that has an aura on it, probably a roll, maybe something that you use to protect it, and you'll be able to attack for 4 damage that wasn't there before. There are a lot of very strong incidental plays with the Archon. It's usually going to play close to that ceiling of an 8, and that ceiling of an 8 is if you have a 4 mana 4/4 flyer that pumps 2 of your creatures +2/+2 or +3/+3. This card is really powerful for the Auras decks. And white has enough role makers that you can make an Auras deck out of any combination of colors. It's going to be better in white-black or better in green-white. That's that ceiling of an 8. But generally speaking, as long as you have a few Auras, this card is good. And if you have a lot of Auras, this card is great. Up next, we have our first Enchanted Tale of the day, Blind Obedience. This card is pretty cool. It plays fairly in a fairly interesting way. You do want to have cards that care about enchantments, but I like Blind Obedience because if you're a very aggressive deck, none of your creatures, it's reverse haste. None of your opponent's creatures can block the turn they come in, which wouldn't be quite worth a card on its own, but the Extort is very nice as a way to deal those last few points of damage, or to use your extra mana, or to adjust for flooding. So I gave it a floor of a 3. It's better in an aggressive deck, but there are places in more controlling decks as long as you are casting enough spells and drawing enough cards. So you have to put some effort into drafting those more controlling decks. It's solid in an aggressive deck, although it's a little bit harder to find time to play it. It's usually going to come down on turn 4, and then it'll help you do those last few points. The life gain is solid, but is less relevant than the life loss on the Extort. Up next, we have Dawn of Hope. This card is a controlling engine. In a lot of sets, what we've seen in the past is this card's been printed before. It's a reprint. It's an Enchanted Tale, and it's been very strong in the past because both modes operate independently. Generally, if you have a 1/1 lifelink, you attack, you draw a card. You're pretty happy with that. There's very little lifelink in this set, and there is a lot of food, but it's difficult to find 4 mana to turn that single food into a fresh card and 3 life. So this ends up being at its strongest in a more controlling deck, where you can take your time to make the lifelinkers, use the lifelinkers, and gain the life. It's not a good card on its own, but there are a lot of little synergies and cards that work well with the Dawn of Hope. Things that care about, like, the threat of activation on this to trigger Celebration is really strong. The making a lot of chump blockers against lots of attackers is really strong. And being able to just self-perpetuate that card advantage by making 1/1s and then gaining life off the 1/1 lifelinkers and drawing a card. It's just hard to get through a Dawn of Hope in the late game for anyone who's trying to attack. And there's lots of incidental token synergies in this set that make it pair well with a lot of cards, especially a lot of rares. Cool card all around. It doesn't fit into every white archetype. It's best in like white-blue or the decks that are holding mana up. So like it's nice in white-blue because you can hold up a counter spell, and then if they don't play a spell, you can just make the 1/1. It's solid. Up next, Expel the Interlopers. This is the only true sweeper in the set. There's lots of like smaller sweepers. Well, there's a few. This one is very good because your worst case scenario, the fail case on Expel the Interlopers, is you just choose 0, wipe the board. I don't think there's any 0. There's like a living lectern that will survive it, but otherwise this is a full board wipe. It kills everything. However, the reason that this is so high, so I would normally give a full board wipe a 5 or a 6 because it's not good in every deck. But if you're an aggressive white deck and you have a whole bunch of 1/1 creatures, you can just name 2, and you will often be able to get a one-sided board wipe. Or maybe you're a black-white deck with lots of rats. Kill everything that isn't a rat. So against opposing rat decks and token decks and go white decks, you will name 0 and wipe the board, which will benefit you anyway. And if you are the aggressor and have lots of smaller creatures, then you just choose a higher number and get a one-sided board wipe. Oftentimes, you'll use this to just kill 2 Hamlet Goliaths, or a Hamlet Goliath and another 6/6, and be winning the game as a result of it. Solid and strong. It goes from pretty good as a sweeper to winning the game as a sweeper. Foods do become 4 cost Revitalize Beard Broken, but if you're paying 4 mana to Revitalize with Dawn of Hope specifically, you would rather make the token, which is why I don't like it in a food deck compared to other decks. It is still good, but like the reason that Dawn of Hope is usually a little bit stronger is because you have the option of maybe making a 1/1 turn and then later on drawing 2 cards off of attacking with 2 1/1s. You don't need the food synergy with Dawn of Hope. You want lifelink synergy. Greater Oromancy. Card doesn't really work. There's a lot of reasons. It's a little bit complicated. Generally speaking, the decks with the most auras also want to be able to play spells that give those creatures auras, which you cannot do if they are an aura creature. This card would be a little bit better if there were more enchantments, but generally speaking, this card won't be worth a whole card. If your opponent, there are times when I will side this card in. Generally speaking, it is going to be very difficult for my opponent to have enough removal for this to be worth it. But not being able to play, like if I have a Greater Oromancy in play and one of my creatures has a monster roll on it and I attack my 3/3 into their 3/3, my opponent can safely block it because they know that I cannot get it any bigger. I can't give it a pump spell. Yes, this card has a lot going. There's a lot of reasons not to play this card. You shouldn't play this card unless your opponent shows you 5 removal spells in a given game. And even then, it's a lot of extra work to turn on. Hey, Kaiser, how you doing? We are moving on to Karmic Justice. I want this card to work. If somebody shows me a way this card can work, then I'll be extremely happy. Generally speaking, the problem with Karmic Justice is in order for this card to be good, you have to have a lot of other permanents that your opponents need to kill. So if I have like a Dawn of Hope and a Blind Obedience out, then my opponent, and then I play the Karmic Justice, then it does something. But there's not enough in this set that my opponent would kill instead of the Karmic Justice, and then it's just a 2-for-1. There are situations where you can have enough auras and enough rare artifacts and enchantments that your opponent has to deal with to make this card playable, but it's going to be incredibly difficult. If you build a Karmic Justice deck and show me, I'll be very happy. Yeah, exactly. It is very pretty. All right, up next we have land tax. If you haven't played with land tax before, just trust me. Generally, if you trigger land tax one time, you're going to win that game because you paid 1 white mana and you drew 3 cards. That's an ancestral recall. But if your opponent triggers land tax one time, you just have to not play a land, and then you get to draw 6 cards off of your land tax. And yes, they are all lands, but your lands are all cards that matter. So this card would have a much lower rating if this were a format where your lands didn't matter, but they do. And taking 3 lands out of your deck that you won't draw is fantastic. Taking 6 lands out of your deck that you won't draw is fantastic. It is a little bit weaker on the play, but if you know you have a land tax and your opponent doesn't, you're probably going to win. And if you stop playing lands after your 3rd land and then your opponent does and you're the aggressive deck, you're probably going to win. The fail cases in land tax are cases when you are probably already winning the game. It's ridiculous. It's crazy to me that they reprinted this card. This card's so good. And it's even a bargain fodder after it's done its thing, Beard. I didn't even think of that because it's only 1 mana and eventually it will just stop doing its thing. But yes, this card is very good. 6 lands that you have, like saying that you don't miss a land drop for the rest of the game and having 6 lands you won't draw is worth missing 1 land drop. Yeah, that's pretty accurate, Kuro. This is Dark Tutelage, but good. Because Dark Tutelage is good when it hits 3 lands also. And it's 3 mana. Oh my god, if it were just lands period, Kaiser, they would not print it. I love this card. I'm glad it needed another printing badly. I'm kind of surprised it wasn't on the reserved list. Up next, Leyline of Sanctity. There are not enough things that target you in this set to make it worth it. On average, this will be a 4 mana card that prevents 1 spell from your opponent, and that is all. And there are enough looters that they don't even really care. This card just doesn't do another thing, but it is beautiful. This is a very nice card, Kuro. Moonshaker Cavalry. This card is, I think it's a little bit worse than Craterhoof Behemoth, but it does still win the game when you cast it, which it should because it's 8 mana. You cast this to an empty board, it's an 8 mana 6/6 with flying. It's not great, but if you cast this with 2 other creatures in play, they both get +3/+3 in flying. You're hitting for 6 more damage than you were previously. If you cast this with 4 creatures, if this is the 4th creature you play, which is not difficult in this set, then that is an extra 12 damage. With 5 creatures, it is an extra 20 damage. This card will almost always win you the game when you play it. It is not free. You have to put some effort into playing to your Moonshaker Cavalry. You might have to run some treasures. You might have to be a little bit heavier white. You might need to play a little bit more to the late game. But this card breaks a board stall wide open, and there are a few cool ways to cheat it in this set. Yes, you want to throw your rats into the moon, and that is how fairy tales come to be. Yeah, exactly. That's the difference between. That's the main difference between this and Craterhoof Behemoth, is that this doesn't have haste. So you losing the haste hurts, Kuro. But being able to, it is a better body than Craterhoof if for some reason you do have to deploy it. So I gave it, the ceiling is a 9. The ceiling should probably be a 10 because it wins the game when you play it. But like getting into that ceiling is pretty tough. I'm gonna just go ahead and lower the floor a little bit and raise the ceiling a little bit. But like the floor is still pretty good. All right, up next we have a really interesting one, Phyrexian Unlife. All right, so you don't lose the game for having 0 life or less. Generally speaking, this is only good if you have, when you meet 2 specific, this is 3 mana gain 10 life. It's slightly better than 3 mana gain 10 life. But generally, 3 mana gain 10 life is fine. It's not as good because your opponent knows when it's coming. Like, if you could play it right before you needed it, it would be a little bit better. The cool thing about Phyrexian Unlife in this set is so once you hit 0 life, like if you, let's say you're at 5 life, and your opponent attacks you for 7 damage to put you to 2, you don't take that damage. So it's 1 full fog that turn. So you go to -2 life, you don't lose the game, and all new damage is dealt to you as though you have infect. But if you're at -2, you can take 9 infect, you will still be at -2. Then you can eat 1 food, and that will absorb a whole extra hit. So it is very, very hard to play with. It is very hard to get more than 10 life, but you get to choose the point at which the life gain is worth it to you. Because 3 mana gain 10 life, I don't think that's quite good enough because your opponent gets to see it coming, but 3 mana gain 20 is. So you can do a few extra things to make this card playable, but you can't make this card good. You just make it playable. Maybe there's a combo somewhere, but like, I don't have Solemnity. I don't think there's a Solemnity combo available in this set. Yeah, interesting, not strong. All right, the original converted person. All right, up next we've got Pollen Shield Hair. So, there are lots of multicolored adventure cards, and I was thinking a lot about where to put them. At first I had them where they were best, the color they were best in. Eventually I settled on just putting them in their base color, their mana value color, alphabetically so that they would be easier to find. But this card is either... the left half of this card is not quite good enough by itself, but the creature half of this card is. A 2 mana 2/2 that pumps your team. If you're giving 1 other creature +1/+1 and getting 3 power out of it, that's playable. That's a 4. It is not hard to build a creature-centric deck. This is at its... If you are a green-white go-wide creature deck, this card's a full 7. But you still play this card at a 4 or a 5 in a mono-white deck, and you just grab a few creatures. A very good card, and it's not strictly multicolored. I wouldn't play it in just the green half, but I would play it as just the white half, and I'd be really happy splashing this card with like a few Crystal Grottos and a few Prophetic Prisms, just for the occasional chance that you can Hair Raising first. It does say tokens, it doesn't pub everything, but it's not that hard to get tokens, and it's one of the reasons that the 2 mana enchantment that makes a 2/2 knight is just so good in this set. Speaking of the 2 mana 2/2 enchantment that makes a 2/2 Night Vigilant Knight, we have the Regal Bunnycorn. This card's just great. Like, if you play this on, I wouldn't always play it on turn 2 and risk my opponent pinging it, but I will often play it on turn 2. It's a little bit interesting to play with because your opponent can shrink it by killing other things, but in this set specifically, it's just not hard to build up a critical mass of permanence. Because if you play this on turn 2, it will likely attack as a 3/3 on turn 3, a 5/5 on turn 4, and then an 8/8 or 9/9 on turn 5. And it's just so big, it's pretty hard to kill. This card might be constructed playable too. So I gave it a 6. That floor of a 4 is if you aren't putting any effort into making multiple permanents at a time. But it'll play closer to a 7. The more celebration you have, the more multiple bodies you have, the more rolls you have. It's very strong. A lot. You'll be, surprisingly, Kaiser, a lot of creatures in that get great with a roll. All right, rest in peace. Beautiful. This is hard. But it's very bad in this format. Generally, this will, at best, preemptively handle half of one of your opponent's cards. That is not good enough for a whole card. You could conceivably sideboard it, but you have better options for exiling graveyards in your sideboard, and nothing is reliant on the graveyard. Lots of decks and archetypes and cards use the graveyard, but nothing is purely reliant on it. Smothering Tithe. I actually went over this one a bunch of times. So, Smothering Tithe is 4 mana to make a treasure once or twice over the course of the game. If you could put enough pressure on using those treasures, this card would have a place. It doesn't. I'm lowering the ceiling to a 3. Because let's say, hypothetically, there are 4 cards that use treasures. Like, that lets you turn treasures into repeated value. And there are cards that let you bargain. The thing is, if you have one of those cards that are like sacrifice, like Food Fight, or I don't remember if it's called Food Fight, but we'll talk about Food Fight later. I was looking at Food Fight with this card, which is sacrifice a treasure, sacrifice an artifact, deal damage to something. If you have that card, your opponent's just going to pay the 2. The fact that your opponent always has this option is tough. And there's nothing that combos, like there's no Howling Mind both players draw 2 cards. There's no each player draws the X cards. There is not a good way to turn Smothering Tithe into bonus cards. You should still pick it because it's a $20 card, but not in Arena. Oh, that's true, Kuro. Spellbook Vendor. This card's just fantastic. This card will play like Luminarch Aspirant, but 1 per creature. So if you can spread out your sorcerer rolls enough, it'll play closer to that ceiling of an 8. If you can sacrifice your auras somewhere, it'll play closer to that ceiling of an 8. It doesn't say you can put the aura on itself. So you can play this as a 2 mana 2/2 or a 3 mana 3/3 with a sorcerer roll. Or you can just keep putting rolls on the same creature if you have cards that care about your auras dying. And if you have cards that care about having a number of enchanted creatures, then you put it on everything. It free triggers Celebration. It goes into every single white deck as a strong card, except for white-blue, where it's just a very good card. Yeah, it's really cool. I like this card a lot. I like that the person who just has a stack of spellbooks is strong. Like, they're just in the village square saying, you want to be a sorcerer? Do you want to be a sorcerer? You should be a sorcerer too. Everybody's going to be a sorcerer. And then someone says, why aren't you a sorcerer? And they say, I am a sorcerer. See? And they hold up a book. And they're a 3/3 that scries on attack. And it's vigilant. Card's very strong. Up next, we have 3 Blind Mice. So, I actually needed to lower the floor on this. So, what you need for 3 Blind Mice is other tokens. Because the danger on this card, the only danger on this card, is that your opponent kills the mouse on turn 3. So if you don't have another token in play, then chapters 2 and chapters 3 don't do anything. But at its worst, this card is 3 mana, make 3 tokens, pump your team and attack, get 1 big attack in. At its best, there are multiple combos that just take over the game. There are some very good, very strong tokens in this set. There are copy tokens. It's really good. Exactly, Kuro. So Beard Broken at my pre-release, I won the whole thing there's a green-white gold card that makes a token copy of target enchantment. So if you turn 3 Blind Mice into a token copy, then you have, because it's chapters 2 and 3, both create a token of copy of target token. And it can target itself if itself is a token. So that first token copy became 4 copies, became 8 copies, became 16 copies, all of which pumped the team. Became completely unbeatable. Yeah, I was making 3+2 to the end mice over end turns, and I beat a bitter boss in that way. I think Ivy has to be a spell. I don't think abilities work. Unless we have Virtue of Loyalty. Oh, I forgot to take the note out. I'll leave the note in. I know it's WTF, because a 2-mana 2/2 with Vigilance is just good enough. Like, that's good enough, and like a 2-mana 2/2 with Vigilance and Flash that also can be duplicated by the cards that duplicate instants, that also trigger on all of the cards that care about instants. That lets you trigger Celebration at instant speed. That also lets you, like it copies everything. This card does everything, and then when you play it for 5 mana, it just wins you the game because you put the count on everything, but also they can block an unlimited amount. What the heck? How does this card exist? You should switch colors in pack 2 when you open Virtue of Loyalty. You should, you should never be past this card. It's really good. This is the best Virtue, and the black one is pretty damn good too. They sure did, Kuro. Yeah, it's a Broker's Ascendancy in one color. It's a monocolored Broker's Ascendancy. Yeah, I think this is one of the most busted enchantments in white enchantments in history. So I gave it an 8. That ceiling is a 9. It doesn't win the game by itself, but it almost does. If you have 2 creatures, this card wins the game. If it won the game by itself entirely, it would be a 10. You do need to put other creatures around it. But that floor of a 7, that's just the 2-mana 2/2 at instant speed. The 2-mana 2/2 Vigilant Flash instant speed creature. With a late game, with the potential upside, with the threat of upside, is so good. And then the upside wins you the game. Next, we have Werefox Bodyguard. This is the last white card. This card is really cool. It's a little bit harder to play with in terms of play skill, but you usually jam it in anyway. Blinking, you can blink your own creature with it by playing it, stacking it. You will blink your own creature with it a surprising amount of time, but just taking out a bigger token is nice. Removing a creature from combat for a little bit. And a lot of the bounce spells in this set are kind of bad because your opponent gets to recast the adventure half. With Werefox Bodyguard, that's not an issue. There aren't as many enters the battlefield effects as there are cast me as a second spell. So the card is really pretty good in this. Like, oftentimes you'll get to block a rat and exile a rat, and that's fine too. And then the gain 2 life means that you can blink your own creature or stack it in response when you need to. Yeah, Virtue of Loyalty is way up there. There is a clear best rare in each color. This is the best rare in white. And it beats land tax. It's pretty close. But yeah, this is the best white rare, Virtue of Loyalty. Well, I guess it's a mythic. This is the best white mythic, but land tax is up there. The land tax is just faster. But they both essentially win you the game. The white rares overall are the best. White is the best color for rares in this set, which I really like because white had the worst commons and uncommons. So, like, it really balances the set out. Like, there's so much intention in this set. Really great. All right, I'm gonna take just some 1-minute break to drink this water. I agree with you, Kaiser. I think all of the Enchanted Tales should be standard legal. All of them. Yes, I'm including Utopia Sprawl, Necropotence, Land Tax, and Goblin Bombardment. Blood Moon, Kaiser, I think this might be a great... I think this might be a great standard format, Kaiser. I think it's gonna be really good. I don't mind Shouldered in standard. Shouldered definitely wins the game, but it's also destructible. Kill it. On to blue. All right, compared to a lot of the obviously constructed Enchanted Tales, As Foretold is actually playable. Like, it has a spot. The reason for that is that the card draw in this set is really good. The reason that As Foretold is playable is because of cards like Quick Study. So you might want 2 As Fortolds, but it is not impossible to get enough mana to make this card playable. It is very difficult. I wouldn't first pick it, But if I have a blue deck where I have like 3 quick studies and maybe the 5 mana draw 3 and make a fairy, I will cram the Asphodel in, because the issue with card draw in this set is time. This isn't a crazy fast set, but you can't do nothing. You need to be deploying threats and blockers and answering threats, or your opponent is going to take over the game. So Asphodel with enough card draw spells is playable, because it enables those. But in general, it's a lot of work. So make sure you have your, like, I will take quick study over Asphodel until I have 3 Asphodel. That's true, Kaiser. But on the other hand, on the flip side, you also have unlimited lands and need less card draw if you have land tax. All right, Asinine Antics. What a fantastic card name, and what a fantastic card. So 4 mana to curse all of your opponent's creatures is fine, and 6 mana to flash curse all of your opponent's creatures is fine. This kind of is like, I mean, it's like a fog almost, and it's not free. Like, you have to have a fair number of bodies, but like if you have 3 2/2s and your opponent attacks you with any 3 creatures, you can flash in the Asinine Antics and block. There are some decks where this card is really bad against. So like, you want to side this out against black-red rats or a green-white tokens deck. But it's pretty nice, like, because in addition to turning off 6 of your opponent's creatures, like even if they are attacking with 6 rats, making 6 cursed rolls is relevant to a lot of decks. Being able to make 6 auras that you can sacrifice, or trigger your 6 black or white cards that care about enchantment deaths. Or maybe you have a Slumbering Keep card and you want to end step make a bunch of curse rolls and then untap and attack with the Keep card that has flying and lifelink and pump it twice. There are fun things you can do with the Asinine Antics, but it is not free. It is not always worth a first pick, and you have to think about how you're using it. But it's cool. I like it. It's a pretty cool board wipe. Exactly, Hero. I was thinking about the Bunnycorn with this card. But like, they do just start chump blocking with all the creatures. It's definitely better against some decks than others, but I like it a lot. I agree with that, Kaiser. I love that mechanic. Copy enchantment. Oops, I did not edit these notes. All right, so this card is the problem with copy enchantment is a lot of the best cards that you want to copy are either already 2 mana or already 3 mana. There's surprisingly few, so there's about 18 cards in the set that are worth copying. There's a huge number of cards in the set, a huge number of enchantments in the set that literally just don't do anything in multiples. Like, so many of these cards don't do any, like, they don't do anything if you copy them. Especially a lot of the Enchanted Tales. Either the Enchanted Tales themselves are bad, or having a second one doesn't matter. The other good targets are things like Bitter Chill or the Cooped Up, which are fine, but you would almost always rather have a second copy of Bitter Chill or a second copy of Cooped Up. In order to build a deck where copy enchantment is good, you need to get something out. You need to have both combos with it and options with it. Like being able to choose between a Bitter Chill and a I can't even think of one. An Extraordinary Journey. Like, Extraordinary Journey is super awkward. You can draw 2 cards a turn with 2 Extraordinary Journeys, but you can't double X on the copy enchantment on Extraordinary Journey. So like, it is uniquely weird in this set, but like, you can, Kuro. That's why, so the ceiling on this is much higher than some of the other build around enchantments, because you can side this in against your opponent when they have a bunch of enchantments, and you can, there are good enchantments that you can draft a combo with this. But it's not free. I wouldn't take it high. Like, if you're trying to decide, playing copy enchantment on a Cooped Up or a Stab Wound is actually pretty great. But if you have to choose between copy enchantment and a Stab Wound, you have to take the Stab Wound first. That's why the score is so low, because pick order wise, you're going to be taking other things higher than it. You need to take the things that it copies before you take the copy enchantment. I'm glad it's in here though. I love this card. Yes, but Kuro, you will never take the copy enchantment over the Virtue of Loyalty. That's the other thing, is like, playing a copy enchantment on a Virtue of Loyalty doesn't do anything. because you are already winning the game with Virtue of Loyalty. A second copy of Virtue of Loyalty doesn't make you win the game more. You have already won. And that's like that's the categories. It's cards that are cheaper than copy enchantment, cards that already win the game without copy enchantment, and cards your opponent controls. But it is still nice. If it is your opponent's circle, though, that's a very good point. I will side in copy enchantment against my opponent who has a Virtue of Loyalty. I will do that probably at least once this format. Yes, you're both right. All right, up next we have Elusive Otter. This card is really cool. So this is the first adventure we've found where it is a little more binary, because you can play this card on turn 1 and it's going to feel really good. It's going to hit for a lot of damage over the course of the game. We have seen in the past what a 1-mana 1/1 with prowess can do, even without the haste. And the built-in evasion is pretty strong. Grove's Bounty will enable so many combats. Like if you play that for X, I don't even think we've seen X mana distribute X+1/+1 counters before. I would play either half of this card pretty happily. The right half is better in the early game. The left half is better in the mid and late game. But you will often just play this for X=5 when you have 7 mana, and then cast the Elusive Otter on the same turn. It's just a good card all around. I almost put this with the green cards because the green half of this card is better than the blue half of this card. But taken together, it's strong. It is strictly better than Thrive, Kuro. Like, Thrive, for those of you who don't know, was green X sorcery by itself, put a +1/+1 counter on X target creature. But like, it's wild, Kuro. We haven't actually had this card before. We've never had X mana distribute X+1/+1 counters before. Like, Thrive is as close as we've had. And this is strictly better than Thrive on just half of an Otter. Very strong. Extraordinary Journey. This is a build around, and it's a pretty cool one. You get to... The downside of Extraordinary Journey is if I exile my opponent's Elusive Otter with Extraordinary Journey, then my opponent can cast the Adventure half, and then cast the normal half again. So it doesn't hit everything, but it will usually cause tempo loss for your opponent, which is like, don't be afraid to play this card for blue, and then draw a card every time you play an adventure. The modality on this card is what makes it cool and strong, but you don't always want to exile everything with it, which is why it doesn't have a slightly higher score. But it is really, and if it weren't blue, it would also be a slightly higher score. But a blue-based adventure deck with Extraordinary Journey will generate so many cards. If you can get 3 cards out of this, you're happy. If you can get 5 cards out of this, it'll probably win you the game. It does trigger off of adventure and any blink spell. There's some pretty good blink spells in this thing. This is a very well-designed card. I like it a lot. We do have Broodlord. Farsight Ritual. This is a cool draw spell. One thing I found is that bargain is not expensive. Like, the ability to bargain something, so instant speed bargain ends up feeling pretty cheap. You do usually have a permanent that you can throw away to bargain. 4 mana to peak 4 and choose 2 is fine without being strong. I won't usually intentionally peak 8 and I won't usually intentionally dig through 8 unless I have specific cards that I'm looking for. But if I have specific cards that I'm looking for, I'm going to be pretty happy for that option. And it's nice because this is instant speed card draw that you can play alongside the counter spells and other flash spells that you want to play in blue. It has diminishing returns, just in that there are, like, this card is not necessarily better than Quick Study at 3 mana draw 2 unless you are consistently bargaining. Yeah, it's just solid. It's a solid draw spell. I gave it a 4. Floor of a 3, that's if it's only ever going to be a 4 mana instant speed divination. And the ceiling of 6 is if you have something specific to dig. Up next, we have a very interesting one I will talk about. Alright, so Force Fruition. Let's say, in a normal game of Magic, you don't ramp. You just play your cards, and your opponent plays their cards, and you counter their spells. Creatures, they kill your creatures, and now we're on turn 6, and the board is relatively stalled out. Playing Force Fruition ends the game. It doesn't win you the game, but the game is over when this card resolves. And because On turn 6, your opponent has drawn minimum 13 cards, which means that they have 27 cards left in their library, which means they can cast 4 spells. The 4th spell that they cast after Force Fruition resolves means the game is over. They just die. However, if the first spell they cast is Disenchant, then they just cast 2 mana, your opponent discards a card, draw 7 cards. If the second spell they cast is Disenchant, then your opponent just casts, your opponent discards a card, you draw 14 cards. You lose that game. If you're playing at a relatively even board, the game is now over. You want to play Force Fruition when you can counterspell that Disenchant. This raises the value of your 3 mana Ice Out, which is counterspell, bargain, and cost 1 less, and your Spell Stutter, which is 2 mana counterspell unless your opponent pays an additional 1. It's been higher. It was higher in Lorwyn. Lorwyn didn't have like any disenchant effects or any good ways to kill Force Fruition. But this set does. There are a solid number of common and uncommon disenchants that people will be playing. So be very careful with your Force Fruition. Almost always take it. This card is very good. Like, this is a good win condition for a flash deck or for a control deck. And the game is over when it comes down. I love it. Too bad cards making a good card is one of the best things about Magic. Too bad cards making an okay card is one of the saddest things about Magic. I haven't gotten to draft since the set came out, but this is important, Gromit. Like, I need people to be able... I want to draft this badly, but I got to draft 5 times and get 5 trophies during early access against all the best players. I'm happy. It is very important that people get to see... Like, I promised playing MTG.com, which this is going to go up on playing MTG.com, that I would make and maintain a draft list with the ratings of all the cards as they progress throughout the season for the entirety of this draft season. All right, up next we have Fraying Sanity. I'm actually lowering this because there is less mill than I was hoping in the set. This card is a mill lord. You need to mill... Like, if there were a few cards like this Cruel Somniphage, which is target player mills 4, it doesn't take a lot of mill to make this card good, but you need some. We're lowering the scores as a result. Very sad about it. If there were just like if there were a single common card in the set that milled your opponent, one, that's all it would take. This card would have a place, and you'd be able to first pick it and force that deck. But there's not, and I think that's in part because Mono Blue Mill was the very best deck in original Eldraine. Yeah, but your opponent actually doesn't put any cards into their discard pile. That is true, Kuro. Like, if your opponent plays 2 spells, they will probably lose. But, so it doesn't actually work that way because this can't trigger after cleanup, and you discard cards at the cleanup step of your turn. So it's after this triggers. Your opponent has to discard cards for hand size. Unfortunately. Some cards say since the last turn, and those would work, but not Fraying Sanity. This is nice art, though. This card is modern playable, by the way. Horned Lock Whale. This is the best blue rare. I gave it an 8. Basically, this is your 6 mana 6/6 with flash also kills a creature. That's it. That's all this card needs to be. It is an instant that you would be playing anyway as a solid removal spell. That then just comes down and your opponent has to spend a lot of extra time killing. Great card. Don't stress about it. Just take it if you're blue. It's almost worth splashing the Lagoon Breach. Not always. But yeah, best blue rare. Not a lot to say. Ingenious Prodigy. This card is really interesting. I think this is the only Skulk card in the set. I haven't seen a lot of Skulk. But being able to play this as like a 2 mana... Oh, you can play this as a 1 mana 0/1 if you're about to put a roll on it. It combos with the Young Hero roll, which I think is so cool. Like, you can play this on turn 1 as an 0/1, put the Young Hero roll on it, and now your 1-power attacker that can't be blocked draws you a card every turn, and it remains the Young Hero because it removes a counter every turn. But you're also just happy. Like, I love variable size creatures. Being able to play this on turn 5 as a 4/5 or turn 6 as a 5/6 The difference between a 0/0 with X counters is also and a 0/1 with X counters is also huge, because that means that you're playing a 4 mana 3/4, which is way better than a 4 mana 3/3, or a 5 mana 4/5, or a 6 mana 5/6. And then it draws you a card every turn. And if for some reason you don't want the card, maybe you're about to deck, or you want to be able to block with it, you can just choose not to remove the counter. So this card is incredibly flexible. And you can... This is one of those cards... So like a lot of the cards in the set, the reason that this card is so good is that blue cares about having creatures or just cards with converted mana value 5 or greater. And the Horned Lock Whale is so strong because you can have that card with converted mana cost 5 or greater without it being a dead card in your hand moving up to that point of the game. Genius Prodigy is the same thing. I just talked myself. I just talked myself up on the Ingenious Prodigy. Because you can play it for X equals 5. It cares about the ferocious aspect because you can get it up to 4 power pretty easily. It skulks in with the young hero roll. And it draws you 2 cards a turn. Card's very strong. Next we have Intruder Alarm. I tried so hard to find a combo in this set that works, but there's no Presence of God that you can tap a creature to make a 1/1. There is no creature that taps to even make like a food token. There were a few 6-card combos. There's only one Mana Dork in the whole set. If you have that Mana Dork, then you can you have 4 copies of that Mana Dork and a Dawn of Hope, then you can make infinite 1/1s. There you can use Tough Cookie and the Iron Crag, and you can animate your Iron Crag with the Intruder Alarm to make infinite mana that way. You can turn on some of the living lands to try and do it that way, but I just could not find an infinite combo that worked. And I couldn't... You're having enough creatures in order to make the ability something favorable to you means that you care more about your creatures untapping them. So I love this card, but I couldn't find a combo that works. If you go infinite with Intruder Alarm, please tell me. I want to know. Kindred Discovery. Solid. It's a little better than the others. It's good in like a rat deck. The only problem with Kindred Discovery is you might die. So you have to have ways to bargain it away. Because if you play Kindred Discovery and name rats and then make 5 rats and draw 5 cards and then attack with 5 rats and draw with 5 cards, well, you're going to need to kill your Kindred Discovery so you don't deck out. But you can generate a lot of card advantage from this with the right deck. The double blue pip means that chances are you want this to be a blue-black or a blue-red deck with rats, or you can make it a blue-black. It's solid in the blue-black fairies deck. But you have to kind of be tribal. And I'm actually raising the ceiling and the floor both a little bit, but it is still a card you have to build with. I will first pick this often, but I won't often pick it up later. Late Light of Anticipation. I like Flash, and it's not worthless, but it is very difficult to get enough value out of the Ley Line of Anticipation. There are a few cards that care about playing cards on your opponent's turn, and being able to... You can eke enough value out of this card to make it playable, but you can't really eke out enough value to make it good. Just a heads up. See, but Kuro, even if you draw it in your opening hand, it's like you mulliganed. And is your mulligan worth all of your spells having flash for the rest of the game? Sometimes. The answer is sometimes, not always, unfortunately. Hey, Foxy, how you doing? All right. Omniscience. 10 mana is too much. There's no good way to cheat it in. Sorry. Heuristic Study. Unlike in Commander, your opponents will not let you draw cards off of the Heuristic Study. And it is difficult to be aggressive enough for the tax to matter when you take turn 3 off to cast the Heuristic Study. Generally, what Heuristic Study does is like Early Frost. Early Frost is 2 mana, tap 3 lands. Like, you have to take your opponent a turn off to make your opponent take a turn off. And then it puts them 1 turn behind. It means that they have to play their 2-drop on 3, their 3-drop on 4, but you took your turn 3 off. And it's very hard to make that worth it. Your opponent's spells cost 1 more, except for when they absolutely need to cast it. If this were mandatory, it would actually be solid. Like, I would play this as a Thorn of Amethyst some of the time. But yeah, you should still take it because it's still a lot of money. And it's beautiful. Both arts for this are beautiful. But yeah, not strong. The one of the reasons white is good is because it has some of the better Enchanted Tail. Sleep Curse Fairy. This card's super cool. So much of what the fairy deck wants to do, hold mana up on turn 2, turn 3, turn 4. So you can jam this on turn 1 and just wait until it ticks up and pour extra mana into it when you can. This is also one of the few activated abilities that does something. So like there's a few other cards that it combos with, like the Ariad's Cauldron. And if my opponent, I actually had a pre-release game during the Two-Headed Giant where if my opponent had figured out that they could take the Sleep Curse Fairy out of my Two-Headed Giant partner's graveyard and start untapping all their creatures, we couldn't have won. So I was very careful not to let them notice. But this card is cool, well designed, and the Ward 2 is just good on it. Like this card ends up being, because you can pay 5 in to make it a 3/3 and it'll untap the next turn. But you're happy playing this and just protecting it for a few turns, playing your normal game while you wait for it to untap. And sometimes you'll draw on turn 7 and it'll just be a bad 3/3 with flying, and that's fine too. Oh my god, I didn't even think of that, Kuro. Like, this card is really bad with Doubling Season specifically. It's really funny. Talion's Messenger. So this floor of a 4 is if you're not in a fairy deck. The trick to Talion's Messenger, this card is fantastic if you can play it and trigger it in the same turn. So that means that you have a 2-drop fairy in play already. If you have a 2-drop fairy in play and you play this card, it is a 6 or a 5. If you don't, it's still a 4. It's a 1/3 that loots and grows every turn. The card is very strong. It's the best in the fairies deck, but you don't have to be a fairies deck for this card to be playable. Yeah, loot, grow on attack, just good enough on its own. Yes, so this is, I mean, you actually mentioned this last time, Kuro. This is Ledger Shredder at an appropriate cost. It actually plays a lot like Ledger Shredder too. And it's a little more work. Like, you can make it as good as a Ledger Shredder in the Fairies deck, which I like. All right, Twining Twins. This card is awesome. If this were a 4-mana 4/4 flying Vigilance Ward 1, that's a 5. That card's very good. You'll still play this card in blue-black fairies, even if you can't Swift Spiral, and you'll still play it in any blue deck, period. You will also play it in blue-white or splash that Swift Spiral off of a Prophetic Prism or a Crystal Grotto and be just really happy about it. Because there's a lot of creatures that care about coming in. You can remove one of the creatures your opponents control from attacking as a double blocker. You can play this on their end step and it won't come back until your end step if you need to remove a blocker. You can use it to dodge wraths. You can use it to dodge removal. Like, it is hard not to get 2 cards worth of value out of this card. And it also has so many little incidental combos. Like, you can let your opponent pay the ward on one of your creatures and then blink it. It triggers Extraordinary Journey twice. So if you have an Extraordinary Journey, you can blink your opponent's creature, draw a card, then cast it and draw a card. Twining Twins is just fantastically powerful. It is a blue card. Like, it is great in blue-white, but you're happy just splashing a little bit of white with the Twining Twins. And I will often be splashing white in my blue decks anyway for Shirai, the busted uncommon. Just really good. For real, Kaiser. It's the rarity shift, Kaiser. That's just where we're at. Up next, Virtue of Knowledge. Not as good as the white Virtue. Mainly contextually, there's just so few cards with triggered or activated abilities in this set. There are a few that are worth it. But like, this is a card that like I might play with. I mean, if you get the white Mythic Virtue or the black Mythic Virtue, you can copy it. Generally speaking, there's like 6 things that are good to copy, and none of them are at common or uncommon. So I don't want to give it a completely unplayable grade, but really don't worry too much about it. It'll be worth a few bucks, so you can take it in paper, but don't bother in Arena. Sagas enter with a lore counter, but it is a triggered ability, so you can copy the Saga ability with the first part. But like 2 mana to copy an ability, that's not worth a whole card. So you have to be able to get a whole card out of the front half and a whole card out of the back half, and that's really difficult. But yeah, there are some cool sagas to work with it, bro. They're just not that good. Right. Huh. Okay, but you're right, Kuro. If I have Virtue of Knowledge and Intruder Alarm, then I only need 2 mana dorks to go infinite with Dawn of Hope. Dawn of Hope. All right, I'll get. I will try that. I'm sure eventually. Virtue of Knowledge, Intruder Alarm, Dawn of Hope, and 2 mana dorks. That's only a 5-card combo. That I thought there were only 6-card combos in the set to make that work. So that is a that is me being wrong. All right, I'll be right back. I'm just gonna refill my water bottle, and we'll start with black on Ashiok. So give me just 60 seconds. All right. I'm back. Let's go. All right, Ashiok. Card's kind of bad in this set. It's a really cool card and very good in a lot of constructed decks. But you're like 5 mana to draw a card every turn is pretty average. I meant to get it up to a, because like it's not bad. It's just bad for a planeswalker. Well, so if you play Ashiok as a 5 mana spell and then -2, your opponent, so it's not good at protecting itself. You don't get to play it on turn 5 and then have it protect itself because it only makes 2 1/1s. And then if your opponent just attacks it with 2 creatures, it doesn't take anything off the board. You have to untap with those 1/1s and the Ashiok still in play for it to be good. And so like, that's solid, but it's not that good. The first ability is totally irrelevant in this set. Adventures do trigger it, but it's tough to do in the same turn. Like if you so let's look at it this way. If your opponent doesn't have, would you pay 5 mana for 2 1/1s that grew starting the next turn. Like, being one toughness is a liability. So if you, it's not that Ashiok is unplayable, but you do need other cards to make it work. Like, I gave her a 4. So like, if you play Ashiok and then a it only triggers at the beginning of combat on your turn, which means that if you want them to be 2/2s to block with, you need to be able to play Ashiok and send something on an adventure in the same turn, which just doesn't happen too often in turn 5. If you get to minus Ashiok and then untap with her in the 1/1s, you're happy. But like, I don't know if I would play Ashiok over a Twisted Sewer Witch in a rat deck, or over a 3/5 flyer that bargains something away in a fairy deck. She doesn't have a place like the other ones, like the other 5-drops do. And the 5-drops in black are very good. That is true, Kuro. So, okay, that's actually a great point. So, like, if I attack, like, no, but they wouldn't play an adventure until I attacked. It's just hard to make Ashiok do the thing. If you play Ashiok on turn 7, you can adventure, send something on an adventure, and minus her at the same time. And then you paid 5 mana for 2 2/2s. If you can defend Ashiok, which means if you're ahead on board when you cast her, then she's pretty good. Then you can minus her. But like, that's just the playable level. That ceiling of a 6, that's not easy to get to. You have to, like, making 2 2/2s and drawing a card is not good enough. That's just, she's not good enough. There's no pay life in this format curve. There's Necropotence. So the pay life cards, I looked it up. It's Necropotence. There's one card, there's another rare that you pay 1 life and draw a card. And then there's Bitter Blossom. Like, all of the other pay life cards are busted, which is why that ceiling is such a high effort. It is really difficult to get her that ceiling. She's difficult to play with. She's difficult to build around. And she's still fine. Like, you'll still play her, but there are better cards to be playing than Ashiok at 5 mana in any specific archetype. If you're in a non-specific archetype for a value card, then Ashiok is fine. Bitter Blossom is lose life. Never mind. There are very few cards that work with Ashiok. So she's just average in this. Slightly above average, but still. I'm going to raise the floor a little bit, but yeah, still leaving her at that 4. It does matter, Kaiser. All right, Beseech the Mirror. You should take this card in paper, and it's not great in draft. Like, black is a very prohibitively difficult mana cost to play. And you would rather draw the card you get with this most of the time. That being said, if you have something like a Bitter Blossom, then this card gets a little bit better. But the bargain isn't free on this card because it's sorcery speed. And it's just, like, it's so hard for the card that you get with Beseech the Mirror to be worth this card. There are cards that do it, which is why that ceiling of a 4 is there. But like, it's usually just going to be a worse version of the card you're fetching with. Problem with Beseech. Up next we have Bitter Blossom. Card's just fantastic. If you play on turn 2, you probably win the game. That 1 life may seem like a loss until you realize that those 1/1 fairies block every turn. If you lose with Bitter Blossom because of the life loss, you are probably going to lose that game anyway. And you lose more slowly than Bitter Blossom. But like, playing with it isn't free. If your opponent has a 2/2 and you have a Bitter Blossom, you don't want to immediately snap off the block. You want to block with both. It is a fairy enchantment, which means it triggers all the things that care about fairies coming into play. Like, we haven't seen a tribal enchantment in a while. But is bargain always worth it? Like, 4 mana to go get a 4 mana value spell from your deck is not good. Not at black. Like, it's playable, but we have not seen, tutors are not as good in draft as they are in constructed. Yes, this turns bargain on 100% of the time. This turns on celebration 100% of the time. This card is just fantastic. It always, yes, you can always bargain. You can always trigger celebration, and you trigger all your fairy synergies, and you always have something to wear rolls, and it flies. You make a flyer every turn. Card's insane. Mythic rare, very good. Cruel Somnophage. I so badly want this card to be good. There are enough graveyard synergies that I will take this a reasonable amount of the time, because Earlier, you heard me say there was only one rare card that mills somebody. This is it. It's not a good mill card, but it is relevant. And you want to have a pretty high density of creatures, which is doable. You want this to be at least a 4/4, which is doable. There are good graveyard hate, good incidental graveyard hates, unfortunately. So like, it's not a free card. If there was less graveyard hate, I would play this card more often. And I actually jammed it at early access before I realized how much incidental strong graveyard hate there was at rare. Yeah, there's not good. It is all graveyards, but like, it is still not that good. This card is quite good in Commander. The only thing about Commander is lots of people exile graveyards in Commander. It's a cool card. The ceiling is high, but it's some work. It's a blue-black card. You do want to be able to cast both halves, but like, this is not a 2-drop. You will never cast this and have it and be happy with it on turn 2. Very sad. But it's a cool card. I think it's actually a great design. Devouring Sugar Maw. This is a card you usually want in black and white. The 4 mana, so it doesn't die if you can't sacrifice something, it just taps, which means sometimes you're going to want to just let it be tapped. But a 6/6 menace trample is really hard to deal with. And it's a 6/6 menace trample that already made a human and a food. This is an adventure that turns on celebration. So you will still play this card with no black sources in your white celebration deck because it triggers celebration at instant speed for just 2 mana. That's that floor of a 4. Like, either half of this card is playable on its own. You do want to have extra bargain fodder. Like, this is the bargain requirements. Artifact, enchantment, or token. So it's not any creature. It is a little bit of work, but it's not bad at all. You do want to treat it like a multicolor card. Like, it's best in specifically a deck that can cast both halves. And that's specifically black-white because of that double black, single white pip. But like, it's just good. Being able to play half for dinner on turn 2 and cast it on turn 4 is really tough to deal with. I like this card a lot, and it's so scary. Like, imagine tentacle jelly worms coming out of a donut. Someone had fun designing this one. It's a bunt cake. You're right, Kuro. With cherries and jelly worms. Lots of teeth. Grave Pact. I visited this card a lot. It's best in rats. It's worst against rats. And utterly, like, if this resolves on turn 4 and you played a turn 2 and turn 3 creature, your opponent's not going to be able to. It's really strong. The floor is a little low, but that's because black is tough, and black is especially tough in a deck that already has creatures out. But there's a lot of decks where it's just good in. You want to be base black. One of the better mythics in Commander and in general. Oh, I didn't know there was a bunt cake analysis. Gumdrop Poisoner, just efficient. This is a 3-mana 3/2 lifelink. Chances are, like, this is the best incidental way to trigger a lot of life gain synergies, and there's a lot of cards that it combos well with. Like, this is the only card that, without the food, can trigger a Griffinary every turn. But the option of, so some games, if your opponent's really aggressive, you're just going to want a 3-mana 3/2 lifelink that already gained 3 life off of the food. But if you have the time against a mid-range deck, you're happy to just self-enable it by making a food, eating the food, and killing a creature on turn 5. So like a 5-mana 3/2 that kills a creature, and a 5-mana 3/2 lifelink that kills a creature is great. A 3-mana 3/2 that made a food and gained you 3 life is great. And beating an aggro deck with this card is great. It's just good all around. Subscribe, Kaiser. It's to get you to subscribe. Sorry. Leyline of the Void. Same problem as Rest in Peace. Twice the mana cost. Not a lot to say. Low floor. Low ceiling. A lot of effort to get it playable. You're never going to be that happy with it. Lich King's Conquest. Now, this is an awesome build around. That floor of a 3, that's if you're just like sacrificing 1 permanent to pick up 1 creature. If you build your deck right to bargain, you can pay 5 mana, sack 6 foods, pick up 6 creatures, it wins you the game. Raising the ceiling. Like, this is a build around that is worth it. And it's going to be a lot of fun to play with. Like, I actually drafted it at the early access and ended up not playing it. But it's got the bargain text, so you can't sacrifice anything. It's worth building around. This card's really cool. All right, Lord Skitter. This card's just efficient. A 3-mana 3/3 that brings along a 1/1 and exiles a card from your opponent's graveyard doesn't sound exciting, but like it's a rat that makes a rat. So it's 2 bodies in 1 turn. It's a 3-mana 4/4, and it's some of that incidental graveyard would hate. It's just really efficient and best in the rat deck. Lord Skitter's Blessing. Okay, I like this card a lot. We have seen Phyrexian Arena and Dark Tutelage and Dark Confidant, those cards that draw you an extra card every turn at the cost of some life, be dangerous. But it's great in a set with Bargain because you can throw it away after it draws you 4 cards. You do risk your opponent killing. So like if you have a rat in play from like a rat out on turn 1, then you can play this turn 2, put a Wicked Roll on your rat and start drawing an extra card each turn. And then your worst case scenario is what? Your opponent spends a removal spell on your rat, and then you can turn this on again later in the game. So I like this card a lot. It's not free, but I like these 2-mana cards that put a Wicked Roll on something. I've been pretty high on Wicked Rolls in general. This is a fixed Bitter Blossom. All right, Necropotence. Love this card. It's better in this set than it has been in a long time. So like in the past, what Necropotence would do is you'd play black, Necropotence, draw 10 cards. That's it for the game. That's all the cards you can draw. In this set, you can draw 7 cards, bargain it away, pretty easy. You have to build that floor of a 2. That's because black is difficult. You have to be very heavy black for Necropotence to be good, and you have to have bargain cards in your deck. You don't have to have them in your hand. You just have to have them in your deck. It's particularly good in Wilds of Eldraine because you have cards that make food to turn each food into 3 fresh cards, and you have the ability to throw away the Necropotence when you need to get out from under it. I love Necropotence. I'm so glad that it's available to draft. I'm going to be drafting it a lot. Oppression. This card is really cool, but not very good. The problem is that if you build your deck to take advantage of Oppression, then that means you have an incredibly low curve. You have lots of 1-drops, lots of 2-drops, and a few 3-drops, and then Oppression. Then what happens once the Oppression comes down is both of you are in top deck mode. It is incredibly difficult to build a deck that is better than your opponent at being in top deck mode and has all of those cards at the extremely low end of the curve. There are a few cards that combo with it, so I don't want to say it's completely unplayable, but your deck will not work if you try to build it to take advantage of Oppression, unless you have a huge number of other rares, and even then, you still risk just drawing them in the wrong order. Very cool though. Oversold Cemetery card gets busted fast. I'm actually gonna read a little bit. So like, it does just lose to some cards. There's some cards that just, I raised the number, lowered the floor lower. There's some cards that it doesn't do anything against. Some decks can't beat this at all. So like, the thing about Oversold Cemetery is you might think, well, how am I gonna get 4 creatures into my graveyard? If I have 2 creatures in my graveyard and 2 creatures in play, I'm just gonna start hitting you. I'm just gonna start attacking with my 2 creatures. Because what are you gonna do? Block? You're gonna kill my creatures and I'm gonna pick them up. You're gonna give me back my adventures and my enter the battlefield effects. Or how are you going to attack through this Oversold Cemetery? I'm just going to keep blocking, letting my creatures die and picking it up every turn. This card is so much value over the course of the game, most opponents will not be able to overcome it. It's not free, but like I will almost always play this card. Polluted Bonds. For 5 mana, when you play Polluted Bonds on 5, there are 2 situations that's going to happen. Either you've both been hitting your land drops, so you play your 5th land, Polluted Bond. They play their 5th land. Or your opponent has been missing their land drops, and they've only got 3 lands in play or 2 lands in play when you play the Polluted Bonds. In which case, you're winning that game anyway. Would you pay 5 mana to drain your opponent 6 life? Would you pay 5 mana to say, target player loses 6 life, you gain 6 life? The answer is usually no. And if your opponent has 5 lands in play, there is no reason for them to play the 9th land, which means that unless you are already winning, this card will not get you enough life to be worth it ever. Or it will, but only because your opponent has something at 9 mana that wins them the game, or needs that 3rd white mana to play the game-winning bomb. It doesn't quite work. It's much better in Command. Sanguine Bond. I want so badly to play with this card. I think it's a food finisher. I don't think it's a particularly good food finisher, but it's pretty cool in general. I'm really excited to play Sanguine Bond turn 5, crack 3 foods on turn 6. But yes, it is hard to get enough food for this card to be worth it. Not as unplayable as some of the other Enchanted Tales, though. Rankle's Prank. This card is so cool and a little bad. 4 mana, each player sacrifices 2 creatures is usually going to be the best mode, but the option of each player losing 4 life or each player discarding 2 cards is pretty nice. Ideally, so like this card doesn't really have much of a place because you can build your deck to sacrifice creatures better and then play it like a Barter in Blood. That's a 3. That's a floor of a 3. If you're only playing one of these modes, if only one of these modes is good in your deck, then it's a 3. If you can make 2 of the modes or 3 of the modes good at the same time, then you'll win the game. But that's incredibly difficult. So like if you can, that's an aggressive deck that makes tokens and has an incredibly low curve, which is doable, but tough. Like if the rat deck can Rankle's Prank for all 3 modes and be really happy about it. You sack 2 rats, you both lose 4 life while you've been dealing more damage to your opponent, and you've already played all the cards in your hand. But it's actually pretty tough to get an aggressive rat deck together. However, there is a red common rat catcher, and it's 3 mana, make 2 rats, it goes on an adventure. That's a card out of your hand, that's 2 creatures for the sacrifice 2 creatures, and that is pressure that made each player lose 4 life. So it's not unplayable, but it is a lot of work and pretty difficult. I do like this card. Spectre Mortality. So the reason this card is good, you're not usually going to wipe the board with this card. Usually you're going to say X equals 1 or X equals 2, and end up with a 3/3 that killed some rats and killed a 2/2. That's quite good in this format. A 3/3 is a good blocker, clearing your opponent's fairies and rats is great. It'll save you games against your opponent's Bitter Blossom. Better in this set than it has been in a lot of others, than this would be in a lot of others. It's not free. It can be difficult to keep creatures in your graveyard, but pretty happy to draft it if I'm playing black. Spiteful Hexmage. Fantastic design. A 1 mana 1/1 with a cursed roll is not terrible. I'm raising the floor to a 4. Nah, I'm leaving it at 3. The 1 mana 1/1 with a cursed roll is not terrible because then you can put another roll on it on turn 2. Raising the floor. Lowering the difficulty. Now we'll leave it like that. All right, so you can play it as a 1 mana 1/1, put a curse roll on later. It's a 1 mana way to trigger Celebration by itself. And there are some creatures that like wielding a curse roll. Just a cool card, I think. Very well designed, and it goes into a lot of decks. You can choose all 3 Kaiser. The end. Don't worry too much. It's an efficient removal spell. 4 mana exile a creature is good. Like that's a 5. If you're at 5 life or less and you have to cast it like this, you're in trouble, but it can still win you the game. The extra text is not super relevant because either it's going to be a common or uncommon that they don't care about so much, or you are dealing with a bomb that they don't have another one of. Just good, efficient, rare removal. Virtue of Persistence. Best black rare, don't think it's close. 2 mana to give a creature -3/-3 and gain 2 life is premier removal. You first pick that removal, and then you let it sit on an adventure uninterrupted, so you get to 7 mana when it starts grinding out more value than your opponent can deal with. Just very good. That is true, Kuro, and that's pretty valuable information. Like getting to see your opponent's hand. Like I'd play 4 mana exile creature, look at my opponent's hand. I like that. It is worth a lot, actually, Kuro. That's a really good point. Like that's a good enough point for me to raise the ceiling. Because knowledge is very powerful in it. Waste Not. There are only 4 playable discard spells, but they are here. You just have to have them. They're mostly rare, and yeah, don't worry too much. This card is not playable unless you already have those spells, and they are rare, so you cannot draft Waste Not and hope to get those spells. But if you start with some good, there's like a 4 mana 2/3 uncommon. Stuff like that, you can get value out of this, but it's not easy. All right, how long was that? We started at 8:30 almost exactly. Hang on. All right, that's an hour and 20 minutes. We're gonna finish tonight. I just need to rest my voice for... Thank you, Kuro. All right, we're going to finish tonight. I need to let my pup into this room, and I will just be a moment. All right, buddy. Oh, good idea, Kuro. I will do that. A top score. Kuro says hi. Hi, I'm back. All right, part 2 of our rare, mythic, and Enchanted Tales set review. All right, up first we have Aggravated Assault. Card doesn't do, like, 5 mana is just a lot for this. It does win you the game if you get to this point. It's just, I'm gonna raise the score to a 2. Because it does, if you have a heavy mana deck, which do exist in this format, you can play Aggravated Assault, but it's just hard to get a whole card's worth of value out of it. There is an infinite combo with this in Nature's Will, but like it's almost worth it. Yeah, playable less so, but yeah, not something you want to play too often. I mean, it's an enchantment. There are infinite combos, and I do like infinite combos. And like just 5 mana is a lot for this. The red Enchanted Tales are the worst ones, and I think it really makes a difference. There's only one that I would consider good, and it's very good. But yeah, generally speaking, the red ones are like really much better in constructed, like Blood Moon. There's only 5 non-basic lands, and you'd rather just play creature removal than Blood Moon to deal with them. Charming Scoundrel, love this card. Very efficient. Always does what you need to do. I meant to raise the score from a 4 to a 5, because either one of the modes is for the late game when you really just need to loot. 2 mana for back to 4. It will usually trigger. It's between there really, but it will trigger Celebration. It attacks for 2 on a 2/2, and it dies into your opponent losing a life. Very cool card. I love the artwork on her. Like, I'd take that hand, and then she would throw me off a boat. But yeah, efficient without being overwhelming. All of the modes are relevant, and when you need it bad. Discard a card, then draw a card is much worse than draw a card, then discard a card, and I would give it a 5 if the looting were looting instead of rummaging. Making a treasure or making a roll attach something for 2 mana is also solid. Decadent Dragon. Your worst case scenario on this is a 4 mana 4/4 flying trample that also makes your treasure on attack. And your best case scenario is that you are a black-red deck and you get to just end step, draw 2 cards, because that's what that expensive taste is usually going to be. You play on their end step, draw 2 cards. It's pretty easy to splash this. So you just take this card if you're red, because red has treasures and prophetic prisms and good ways to just make black mana every once in a while. Turn 3, you get to dig for a land. It is a little awkward because generally on turn 4, you're going to want to play this card. But you're okay just digging for a land or 2. And in the late game, it ends up being a 3-for-1 consistently. Cool card, very strong, good, second best red rare. Lots of cards combo with Unnatural Growth. Like, how many times do you need to double your creature's power before you're happy, Kuro? Fiery Emancipation. Card wins the game. It's actually, I put this card in the same category as Aggravated Assault. You put it in when you don't have other good ways to win, but you need to curve out into this. Like, you need to have 3-drop, 4-drop, 5-drop Fiery Emancipation. You can treat this card like an overrun. It's not that great. There is a red-green ramp deck where I think that this card would actually fit in pretty well, and it ends up being a worse version of Unnatural Growth in that deck, but it's not unplayable like a lot of the other. Food Fight. Card's pretty cool. It's a good way. There are cards that repeatedly make treasures. You can't, and food, and you can't play this card unless you can make food and treasure more than once with it, because it does nothing by itself. You can't play this card and that to an empty board. You have to have a big pile of treasures and a big pile of food, and then it's playable, but it's not that strong. I would love to get a Food Fight deck together. And the nice thing about Food Fight is it does stack. So if you have 4 copies of Food Fight, then your artifacts, your treasures, and your food, you can fling them for 5 damage. So I will eventually grab a Food Fight and then pick up 2 more Food Fights, because nobody else is going to take the Food Fights, and just try and draft treasure throwing deck. It's going to be a lot of fun, but the card is very hard to play with, and it's really difficult to get the cards to go with it. It's usually going to play much closer to that floor of a 1. I'm lowering. So this should probably be a 2. It's usually going to play closer to that floor of a 1, but there is a Food Fight deck that I'm going to try and put together. Oh, you're right, Kuro. And actually, this is a good reason to play Copy Enchantment. I play this card with Copy Enchantment. This might be my personal highest pick in this set. And that's not because it's the best card in this set, although it's very strong. But I think it's the most fun card to play with in this set. There are so many good things to sacrifice. There's a reason that they don't make free sacrifice outlets anymore. But I will first pick Goblin Bombardment over just about anything, because it informs the rest of my deck so well. But the floor of that, you do have to have things to sacrifice. Not every deck has things to sacrifice. But even if you only play the Goblin Bombardment without any sack fodder, if you just have it out, well, now your opponent can't actually remove anything. Can't play any 1 toughness creature. Like, every time they try and play, where are you? Like, your opponent can no longer play this Virtue against you. The Black Virtue. 2 mana, target creature gets -3/-3. If this spell fizzles, they don't get the adventure. It just goes away. So Goblin Bombardment actually turns off enough of your opponent's adventure creatures that I will still play it even without a dedicated sacrifice deck. You should, Kuro. I would love that. Yeah, Goblin Rats is one of my favorite decks you can draft. So I gave it a ceiling of a 9, which is really high, because a lot of the times you'll have a deck where you're just digging for this card because you can play it and it'll win you the game. I love Goblin Bombardment. I was so glad. I didn't know this card was in the set. I'm in that early access draft, and I drafted it, and I was like, oh, I get to play with Goblin Bombardment. Card's so good. There's also 2 Threatens in the set. This card, and this is the only sacrifice outlet that you can play before the Threaten. It's the only one. A Godric, Cloaked Reveler. Card's just nuts. A 3-mana 3/3 with haste is good enough in this set. That's a 5. Haste in a celebration set is great. It has haste, and it celebrates itself into a dragon. What a like I'd go to his parties. But if you can play Godric and have one of those cards that makes a 2/2 or a 1/1 at the beginning of combat, then it's just a 4/4 flying dragon the turn it comes down. And there are so many good ways to just give this a monstrous roll on one of your creatures and attack as a 4/4 with fire breathing. Like, this card is a reason to be the celebration deck. Quite strong. Heartflame Duelist. I meant to put this with the white cards. I move it back to the white cards. But, like, this isn't really a white card because you want to be able to Heartflame Slash. Heartflame Slash is the good half of this card. 3 damage to any target for 3 mana is playable. And having a 3/1 on the back end is great. This is a gold card. You want this to be in red, in your red-white deck, because you don't even want to like splash half of it, because you want to be able to Heartflame Slash somebody and then cast it right away. And that's tough to do, because if you have to wait, some of the other adventures we've seen, we're fine just waiting 5 turns for that extra color. But the Heartflame Duelist, the 3/1's not going to be that good later on. And the lifelink is just a bonus. Like, having a little bit of extra lifelink on your next Heartflame Slash is just a bonus. Yeah, I just gave it a 5, which is very efficient. Eldraine, the Pyro Hammer. That floor of a 3. So actually, that's a 4 mana 4/4 with a double red pip. It's usually going to play close to a 4 with a double red pip. Generally, there are pretty good cheap burn spells in this. Like being able to turn your Torch the Tower into a lightning bolt, or 3 to a creature and 3 to a player, pretty strong. So like that ceiling of a 5, that's if you have the other burn spells. But like I won't move into red for Eldraine. But if I just took a Torch Tower and a Beam Splitting Bolt, then I'm going to be pretty happy to take Eldraine. Oh, and Eldraine Beam Splitting Bolt is a good way to win the game, because like you can just nuke your opponent for 10 with a Beam Splitting Bolt, the uncommon that you can bargain to deal double damage. Yeah, I like Eldraine a lot. Helen the Fey-Blooded. This card's a beast. You don't need the Birthright boon, but like having an adventure that's just draw a card is pretty nice. There are a lot of ores in this set, so it's nice being able to dig for them. This is a 5 if it's just a 3 mana 2/2 double strike with a roll that grows your team. Double strike is better in this set than just about any other set because of rolls. So you put a roll on this, and you don't just get, if you put a monstrous roll on Kellen, you don't just get an extra 2 power and trample, you get an extra 2 power and trample plus another power for each of your team. This is a fairly red card because usually that Birthright boon, there are not a lot of auras you want to fetch with Birthright boon that you put onto Kellen itself. You Birthright boon for like a cooped up or a removal spell, and you're pretty happy with it. And I'm happy splashing Birthright boon off of Prophetic Prism. Oh, thank you, Kuro. Yeah, actually, Dragon Mantle is a great card to grab with Kellen, and then you just shoot 2 cards, and now you have a huge double striker. Wow. Okay, I forgot about Dragon Mantle. That's great. I don't think that's enough to raise the ceiling, because I did just assume that you'd be able to get something. 6 is pretty high. Leyline of Lightning. This is the most playable Leyline in the set. That's not because you can't play this card in a vacuum, but there are a lot of good, strong combos, like playing with Godric, not Godric, where'd you go? Eldraine. Playing with like Eldraine is fine. There are cards that care about non-combat damage. 1 damage is relevant because you can usually ping something out, and 2 damage off 2 spells is nice. I do like the Leyline of Lightning a lot more than the other ones. It's still not great. Like, it's a lot of work for not a huge amount of payoff, but it'll happen sometime. Mana Flare, not good on its own. It's just difficult to get more value, because when you play Mana Flare, let's say you play it on turn 3, then your opponent has double mana before you. They get a whole turn with double mana before you get your turn with double mana. That being said, there are a few bad cards that get solid when you have the Mana Flare. But you have 1 Mana Flare, 1 Aggravated Assault in your deck is not enough for you to play the Mana Flare. You need a bunch of cards that care about having double mana for Mana Flare to be good. And it's not easy to do that. Raging Battle Mouse. This is a premier celebration card. Like, it's very aggressive. It's a 2 mana 2/1, but it's a 2 mana 2/1 that lets you play 2 2-drops on turn 3, or maybe the front half of an adventure and the back half of an adventure. And growing any creature, not just itself, with the celebration means that you will usually have an attack with it. I'll be pretty happy to play this in any given adventure deck. Up next, we've got the Realm Scourger Hellkite. You will almost always bargain this card. It's trivial on turn 6 to have something available to bargain, and on turn 6, you bargain this, you can play Realm Scourger Hellkite and another spell, or Realm Scourger Hellkite, take out 2 blockers. 6 mana 4/6 Flying Haste would be good enough on its own. If you untap with Realm Scourger Hellkite, you win the game. and 6 toughness is tough for a lot of decks to deal with. This is a red bomb, and I have it as the best red rare in the set. This is a very good dragon. Yeah, exactly, Night Dark. It's really strong. Yeah, Flying Haste on a 6-drop, like a 6 mana 4/6 Flying Haste, I'd play. 6 mana 4/6 that can cast a second spell or ping 2 things and then untap and kill your opponent. You know, it's just too good. Card's really good. Red Cap Gutter Dweller, second best rare in the set, or in red. Second best rare in red, definitely up there. 4 mana for 3 bodies and 5 power. 3 of it has menace. Very good. It is not itself a rat, but it makes 2 rats. And the more rats you have, the better it is. But like really, you don't need that many for this card to be good because it is a 4 mana 5/5. It may take 2. It's a 4 mana 5/5 that draws you 2 cards. And it may take you 2 turns to get to a 5/5 and to draw you 2 cards, but it's still very good. And even if your opponent has the removal spell for it, the turn it comes down, you're only out 4 mana, and you get to leave 2 rats behind. Card's very strong. Good reason to be red. Repercussion. I love the flavor text on this card. I love this card. I did not find a way to make this card asymmetrical, which is why it's a 1. If you find a way to break it, tell me. If you play it and it kills your opponent, tell me. But like crashing your 5/5 into their 5/5, like it does say your opponent can't block this turn. They take the damage, but you have to take a lot of damage too. And there are better versions of this card, better ways to do that here. I mean, like, Dragon Mantle is going to be better on a Ginger Brute than it would if you had a Repercussion in play. And if your common artifact will be stronger with the Dragon Mantle than your mythic rare double red 3 mana enchantment, you stick with the common artifact. Rotisserie Elemental. 1 mana 1/1 with menace is the reason to play this card. Generally, by the time you want to sacrifice it for value, your opponent's going to be able to block it. And it's pretty easy for them to just have 2 2/2s to block it with. But a turn 1 Rotisserie Elemental and then a turn 2 put a Wicked Roll on it. Like 1-drops with evasion are just good in this set. A 1 mana 1/1 with menace is something I would play in this set because of the rolls that I can put on it on turn 2. And the upside of the skewer counter card advantage is nice. It's quite a bit worse than Bomat Courier. But it's close enough to Bomat Courier that I'm happy to play it. It just, you have to build a little bit with that in mind. Scalding Viper, very efficient, very dangerous card. Bouncing anything is nice. You can bounce your own permanents, which is often nice in this set. And the 2 mana 2/1 that pings your opponent a few times is pretty good, especially since it already gained you some tempo. Not strict card advantage, but it hits hard and hits early. And it is multicolored. You want this to be a blue and a red card. You want to play it in a deck that can make both blue and red mana. I like it a lot. It's also just so cool. Love the art, love the style, love the flavor. Shared Animosity. This card's actually solid with rats. I'm gonna like, this is not the payoff you want for 100 rats. Like if you have 6 rats, there are better ways to make those rats lethal. I would rather have the Twisted Sewer Witch or a Totentanz, but this is actually a reasonable substitute. There are also enough other tribes that you might end up with to just randomly play it. I might splash it in fairies. I do think it's very good splash in fairies, but it's hard to splash red in fairies. Fairies is not good at splashing in general. So like if you're a blue-black deck with a few of the rare lands that let you splash this card, or a few Prophetic Prisms, or a few Gristle Grottos, or some Edge Walls, like there are ways that you can splash this card in fairies, but it is better in fairies than in rats, and that's because fairies has fewer effects like this in rats. And this card is also better with more evasion. Very chunky fairies, girl. Sneak Attack. You need 7. You need 7 cards that you can play with Sneak Attack for Sneak Attack to be good. And the problem with this set in particular is most of the creatures that you would play with Sneak Attack are going to be on an adventure, which means you can't put them in with Sneak Attack, which makes me very sad. But if you have like 5, 6, 7 mythic rares spread across all the colors, play it. Go for it. This is not completely unplayable, but it's not something you want to take high. However, in a paper draft, you'll often take it because it's like $5. Cool card. Song of Totentanz. This is arguably better than the Mythic Dragon because it deals more damage, but it is purely offensive. You can never block with this card. So just math-wise, if you've never played with X11s before, that's true, Kuro. That's a good point. No, because that's still a ceiling of a 5, because I gave it a ceiling of a 5 because of the weird tribes that you had access to. All right, Song of Totem Dance. If you play this as like 3 mana, make 2 Wrath with haste, that's fine. If you play it as 7 mana, make 6 Wraths with haste, then you're gonna win. If you play, like, you'll have a situation where you just pay 1 red mana to give your team haste and win the game that way. Card's very flexible, it's very offensive. Like, you aren't going to deal, you're never gonna block with this card, but that's fine because it'll still win you the game a lot of the time. If you make 8 rats and your opponent has 2 blockers, 2 2/2s, well, then you're hitting them for 6. But then the next turn you're hitting them for 4, and the turn after that you're hitting them for 2. It means that you dealt 12 damage with this song over 3 turns. So it's a lot more than just X damage. And the reason I gave it such a high score compared to a lot of the other rares is I will splash this card. I'll take this card in my white-blue deck with 2 Prophetic Prisms and an Evolving Wilds. I'll take this card in my green-white deck with mostly enchantments and a few Lay of the Lands, and I'll take this card in my green. Like, you will almost always play this card, even if you aren't red. That's why we have this song. Whereas, like, even this dragon's really good, but it's tough to splash, and I might not play it, if I open it pack 3. If I open it pack 2, I'm still probably cramming it in and just switching to red. But yeah, I like Song of Totem Tans a lot. It's funny how much better the Song of Totem Tans is than Totem Tans. And Totem Tans is still good. Good night, Kuro. You're very welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I was happy you were here. Have a good one and good luck. I'll talk to you later. Virtue of Courage. So this is a 4 almost entirely because of 2 mana, deal 2 damage to any target at instant speed. That's just solid. It's tough to get value out of the second half, but like, it's a nice bit of gravy, and it's one of the reasons that I like Leyline of Lightning. Like, I'll play Leyline of Lightning if I have cards like this Virtue of Courage. There's a kind of a cool incidental damage deck where you can build up some value. Like, this card is good with the Goblin Bombardment. It's not good enough with Repercussions. But like, I'm happy to play this card as that instant Embereth, because that's just what red wants to be doing. I like punctuating each of these colors with a virtue. This one is much more reasonably costed, powered, and like, often this is going to be 2 mana to deal 2 damage to any target, and then later on you pay 5 mana for something that you can throw away to a bargain. All right, on to green. That's our last normal mono color. Blossoming Tortoise. Really cool card. I gave it a 4 because that's what a 4 mana 3/3 that usually draws a card is going to be. It doesn't attack for free for forever. Milling 3 is relevant. But it's a nice piece of self-mill, and it's pretty good with some of the other graveyard synergies. So if you have those graveyard synergies, it'll play closer to a 6. Or if you have 6 drops that you want to make sure you get down. I actually had it a 5, but there's not as many good 6 drops as I thought. I like this card a lot, though. I'll be playing it in most green decks. Like, you don't cut it too often, but you do want to try and get more cards that care about ramping, and more cards that care about having a graveyard for it to be strong. Bramble Familiar. I gave it a 5. So this is a 2 mana 2/2 that makes mana. Like, that's just good. This is a good dork. You're not going to fetch quests too often, but sometimes you'll draw this in the late game, and having it not be a dead card in the late game is nice. Being able to pick it up and fetch quests at some point is nice. Like, it is a dork that your opponent has to kill. The difference between this and something like a Shigeki. It's a lot like Shigeki, or what other dorks have good late game payoffs? But you can't do this very many times in a game. So earlier we talked about Force Fruition. That gives you 3 additional spells. You're only going to get to fetch quest max 3 times per game. So it's very limited on the additional value you can pull out of it, but it's still 5 just on how good a 2-mana 2/2 dork is. Very cool card. It's a lot bigger than I realized, because like that's a cottage there. I thought it was really tiny. Up next we have best green Enchanted Tail for sure. Possibly best Enchanted Tail overall, but tough in general. It is better in limited because your opponent has to play creatures in limited. We won against somebody playing this against us in Two-Headed Giant, and both of us couldn't have more than 2 creatures in play, so we had the Knight of Doves out, and our opponent just kept killing our enchantments, and we kept having to kill our own doves to keep Defense of the Heart from triggering. Because every time an enchantment died, Knight of Doves is mandatory. It automatically makes a bird. So they would go end step, kill your Knight of Doves, and we'd be like, oh shit, bargain away our bird. That was a really fun game. But yeah, it's a little work. It's not free. I gave it a floor of 6 with a ceiling of 10, because like that floor of 6 is if you're getting 2 5-drops, 2 6-drops. Your opponent will usually be forced to trigger this. And all you have to really do is wait until your opponent has 3 creatures in play. Like if you play this on turn 4, you can keep your opponent from playing a 3rd creature. Play it on turn 6, they'll have 3 creatures and you'll just win the game. Very, very strong card. Doubling Season. I gave it a 2. You can double your opponent's stun counters. It's solid without being... Like, this is a build around, and it's not a particularly strong one. But there are enough token makers that I'm not willing to rule it out. You should still take it because it's very expensive, and everybody wants it for Commander. Elvish Archivist. Really cool card. It triggers... So, like, if it had one ability, it would be playable, but since it has both, it goes into most every green deck, because every green deck either makes food or plays enchantments. Every green deck makes food or rolls. It's a little fragile, so, like, it's not always something... Like, you play it on turn 2 sometimes, but often you're going to want to wait a little bit until you can put a food into play on the same turn, or put an enchantment into play on the same turn to get it to replace itself. Or just pretend that you can put a food into play or an enchantment into response to whatever your opponent's doing. There are enough instants that play rolls on your opponent's turn that you can get 2 cards out of this every turn cycle. There are not a ton of ways to put food in an instance, but you only really want to get this to like a 2/3 or a 4/5 before you can take your time. Very cool. Feral Encounter. Your worst case scenario with Feral Encounter is green, fight. Your best case scenario with Feral Encounter is green, draw a card, fight. Just very efficient all around, what you want to be doing in green. Your opponent does have time to deal with it, but you can play the creature you draw Feral Encounter the same turn. Good card, better than a bite, better than a commune with nature. It's both. Gruff Triplets, best green card. The only reason it's an 8 and not a 9 is because it's got green in the cost, and I will sometimes pass Gruff Triplets. Not often. If I open Gruff Triplets in pack 3 and have no other green cards, I will pass Gruff Triplets. But otherwise, I'm taking this card and going green. It does win the game. The best case scenario with Gruff Triplets is you kill it. If your opponent plays a Gruff Triplets, your best case scenario is to wipe the board. There are 2 ways to do that. Otherwise... Your best case scenario is to draw 3 removal spells. This card eats 3 strong removal spells. It's very interesting, very powerful, and the thing is, somebody said you can go Doubling Season turn 5 and then turn 6 Gruff Triplets, and now you've got 5 3/3s, and the first 3/3 makes 6 counters, puts 6 counters and everything, and then the next one dies and puts 12 counters and everything. I'm like, no, you don't get it. You have already won the game when you cast this card. Like, you don't need Doubling Season or Parallel Lives to make Gruff Triplets good. It's not a combo. Gruff Triplets just wins the game. It's 9 power for 6 mana, and then when they kill something, it becomes 12 power. Silly card. Your opponent can deal with it. Like, if your opponent has Gruff Triplets in their deck, then you need to start citing in cards like Johan's Stopgap. Things that are removal spells for the Gruff Triplet. But this is a card you want to know about if it's at your draft table and if your opponent has it. Hardened Scales. It requires rares, and it requires a lot of them. And even then, it's only going to give you like 4 counters a game. And 1 mana for 4 counters is solid, but it's not worth bending over backwards. You will occasionally have an incidentally good Hardened Scales deck when you open it, because no one else is going to be taking it, but not quite good enough. Like, again, you don't need Hardened Scales to make Gruff Triplets busted. Like, most of the cards that use +1/+1 counters don't actually need the Hardened Scale. There's not much of a place for it. However, Hardened Scales is viable in this Saturday's $30 vintage deck now. $30 vintage MTGO tournament now. Hardened Scales is now cheap enough to play it. Leyline of Abundance. So there's only one Dork at common, one Dork at rare. That is not enough for Leyline of Abundance to be good. If you have 6 Dorks, go for it. Otherwise, don't bother. Mosswood Dread Knight. Card's just crazy. It is multicolored. You have to be able to play Dread Whisters for this card to be good. But a 2-mana 3/2 with Trample is great. 2-mana 3/2 with a 4-mana 3/2 with Trample that drew you a card is great. And it can't die. It's just a huge amount of value over the course of the game. There are ways to answer it, but none of them are good. Nature's Will. Bad, but infinite with Ambitious Assault. And there are a few other little combos. So we've seen the 4-mana one from Guilds of Ravnica, the one that untaps your lands every turn. That card is solid in draft, but it is really hard to use a draft around. Like, you have to find a good Wilderness Reclamation. You have to find a way to use all that mana every turn, which is easier than using all that mana every turn and hitting your opponent. So this card is actually solid with enough dorks and enough big spells, because sometimes it makes decks with like lots of Shattered Oaths good. Shattered Oath is 5 mana common, destroy target creature, put a wicked roll on something, because you can use your pre-combat main phase to spend all your mana to deal with a blocker, hit them, and then untap all your lands. Like, that's a lot of work, and I actually want to already have all that removal before I play the Nature's Will. Cool card. I'm glad they reprinted it, but very hard to work with format. Parallel Lives. There are just enough. The difference between Doubling Season and Parallel Lives, so the counters are not super relevant on Doubling Season. Being 5 mana is like, the things that you want to double in this format cost 5 mana. So it's work. You can draft around, but you can draft a deck built around Parallel Lives more easily than you can take draft a deck built around Doubling Season. You may even pick them both up occasionally, because people don't want a lot of these cards. And they stack, but like, this card is playable while difficult to play with. You need a lot of uncommons, but there's some really good like turn 4 Parallel Lives, turn 5 Imoden's Recruiter, the 5 mana make 2 knights. Like, 4 knights is way more than 2 knights. Then you get to untap and kill them. So yeah, not as unplayable as Doubling Season or the 3rd copy of the effect Primal Vigor. Primal Vigor is actually getting dropped to a 1 because it is symmetrical, and your opponent will have the first chance to use their Primal Vigor. Prismatic Omen. It is not worth a whole card to fix your mana without granting you an additional mana. Like, Lay of the Land grants an additional mana. Land Tax grants 3 additional mana. There is not a reason, like, there's no card that cares about basic land types in this set. Maybe there's a 5-color pile that'll make it worth it, but like, you don't need Prismatic Omen to be a 5-color pile. Cool card, but not playable. Questing Druid. This is just a 3-for-1 in red-green. You don't really want to play it if you're not red-green specifically, but like, even in like a green-blue deck with enough cantrips, this card is fine. It's one of the reasons to play Sleight of Hand. You want to be able to play both halves though. Like, Seek the Beast is better than the Questing Druid have. Being able to say end step, Seek the Beast, untap, play the land I drew, play the creature I drew, it's better than playing the 1/1. So like, you can play this in a red deck with the Prophetic Prism and be very happy with it. In a red-green deck, you will draw 2 cards, and you will be able to grow it. So like, if you need both land drops, you can play this during your own main phase, because it's until, oh no, it's only until the end of your next end step. So like, you can play it on your opponent's turn and play the cards untap and play the cards on your turn, but it's gonna be tough to play it on your own turn and then play the card. Sentinel of Lost Lore. 3 3/4 is very efficient. If you can grab an extra adventure off your Questing Druid or take away an adventure from your opponent, that's excellent. Being able to exile your opponent's graveyard is relevant. This is a nice 3-mana. This is a nice 3-drop with some utility, because you can play it on is hard to get utility out of it on turn 3, but not impossible. It's just solid. Like, it's a 4. If you have a lot of 2-mana adventures, it's a 6. But just does kind of a lot of good. Huntsman's Redemption. A 3-mana 3/3 that pushes 1 attack in 2 turns later is good enough on its own. And occasionally, you'll need to turn a rat into a fresh land or a better creature, and that's good too. Card's just very efficient and strong. Thunder's Debut. 8 mana for 2 creatures from the top of your deck. Something you have to build around, and it's difficult to build around. Like, if you have... Like, you can run the Thunder's Debut if you have in your deck... Where are you? A Cavalry. Like, if you have a Moonshaker Cavalry in your deck, 20 cards is your whole deck. Like, it's hard to miss the Moonshaker Cavalry with this. You have to bargain it, but this card with... You can go get a Moonshaker Cavalry and another creature, and some of those creatures might even make multiple bodies. So, like, there are rares that make this playable, but you have to have them first. Unnatural Growth. This, having all your creatures be double size for all intents and purposes. So, like, you're double sized for all combats, but your opponent can still give a creature -3/-3 or deal 2 damage to it at the right time in order to kill it. It's definitely a base green card. Green is a pretty high cost. But if you are base green and you have the fixing to play this card, you should play this card. It does a lot of work. Virtue of Strength. If you have use for a Raised Dead that is on an adventure, great. And there are cards that care about adventures. Like, if you have, like, this card is playable with, like, the Sentinel of Lost Lore. There are reasons that Raised Dead is good enough on its own. The 7 mana is essentially useless. Like, don't worry too much about it. You have to have cards that want you to play a 1-mana adventure for this card to be good. That's pretty accurate, Night Dark. All right, last section. We've got multicolored lands and artifacts coming. Multicolored artifacts and lands. This will be pretty quick. There's not a lot of multicolored cards in this set. I'll be talking about more tomorrow for the set review. Not the set review, my draft finder. Hilda of the Icy Crown. This card is really cool. It is ludicrously powerful if you tap one of your opponent's creatures and pay 1. It doesn't enable itself. It does not do anything at all to tap your opponent's creature. But, like, if you can play 1 Plunge, which taps a creature and scries you 1 and makes a 4/4, and you're going to win the game. It's good with so many different rares. Like, in the white-blue tap deck, this card is not beatable. That's not true. They can just kill it. But, like, you can build to protect it. You don't want to play this on turn 4. And often your opponent will, like, if you just wait a bit, then your opponent will have their removal spell, and you get to respond by making a 4/4 growing your team. Your opponent can't play 4 mana, deal 4 damage to it if you have any mana untapped, because you can tap a creature and grow it in response. But, like, it is so easy to pull enough of value out of Hilda to win the game. First pick it, draft around it. Hilda and Shirai is the uncommon version of this effect, are both so powerful that, like, they carry the white-blue tapper deck. Cool card. First pick it, often. You can get it. Like, the ceiling of this card is 10. The ceiling of this card is win the game. Will, Sign of Peace. This is a bad Mythic rare. It's a 4 because a 2/4 with Vigilance is actually pretty good in this format. And you... If you can eat a food... So you can play this on turn 3. Turn 4, attack, eat a food, tap it, and then you have successfully made 1 mana with Will, Scion of Peace. Which is marginal upside, but it can matter. There are, like, some artifacts that draw cards. But overall, this is a 2/4 with Vigilance. That is hard to get more value out of. I'm lowering this to a 3. It's so hard to make this card work. Unlike the Likeness Looter, so every part of this card is great. It's a fairy for 2 mana. It's a flyer for 2 mana that can wield rolls. Looting for free every turn is incredibly hard to deal with. Especially because so many things in this set care about your graveyard, but there's no self-mill. And later in the game when you don't need the looting as much, or don't need or want to upgrade from a 2-mana flyer, just turn into something else. Fantastic, efficient, very rare. Talion, the Kindly Lord. So the body is good enough. A 4-mana 3/4 flying is good enough. And generally speaking, if you can name the removal spell your opponent is going to use to kill it, then that's good enough. Like, you will be able to, like, if you expect your opponent to have a cut short, you'll name 4, and they will kill it and lose 2 life, and you draw a card, and that's just good enough on its own. But some games, it just completely shuts your opponent down. Some games you'll name 3, and then it'll seem like Talion's not doing anything, but then you'll look over at your opponent's hand, and you'll realize that they had 6 spells that they just couldn't play through Talion. We did break it down a little against like blue-red and black-green. So blue-green and black-green, and some of the black decks you want to name 3. Most of the time you want to name 2. Some of the mono-red decks you want to name 4. So if your opponent's mono-red, you name 4, because that's what all of the spells that kill this cost. Just really efficient and fun. I like Talion a lot. Rowan, Sign of War, slightly better than Will, but only slightly. 3 mana 4/2 menace is more fragile, but attacks better and is better in black-red. It is easier to this combos with Necropotence. You can pay 5 life, and then all those spells are cheaper, but it takes 2 turns because you don't get the cards from Necropotence until your end step. Kind of weak, and doesn't do a lot. Very fragile. Agatha. So this is a card that we've seen. It would be so good in other sets. It is difficult to get any value at all out of her first ability. So few cards in this set have activated ability. Like 5 or 6. And only 5 of them are strong. There are like a few things like the 2 mana 1/3 that filters mana can make mana of any color with Agatha out. And she's not unplayable because like you don't really want a 2 mana 1/1, but 5 mana to pump your team and give it haste is solid. Overall, don't worry too much about Agatha. If you find it rare, there are a few rares that work with her, but not a lot. Go for it. Yenna is a beast. 4 mana 4/4 is good enough. Often a 4 mana 4/4. So like when I play with Yenna, I like to copy a monster roll onto Yenna to make a 5/5, untap her, scry 2, and then attack with her. But there are a ton of nutty enchantments that are just so good to copy, and there's so many little engines you can build because of bargain. Like you can use Yenna to copy a hatching plans, sacrifice the hatching plans to a bargain, then copy the hatching plans again. You can use Yenna to copy any of the Enchanted Tales. Just really strong in this format specifically. There's so many good things because the Enchanted Tales to copy. And often you'll just copy like a Utopia Sprawl and untap her and be pretty happy. Just copying rolls is good enough on Yenna. Because a 4 mana 4/4 body is such a good stat line for this base. Ariad of the Charmed Apple. Combos with Stab Wound, combos with lots of other stuff that this card makes like Spreading Seas pretty good. It makes Utopia Sprawl even better. And sometimes you will just put you can put rolls on your opponent's creatures fairly often and just deal with it that way. Ariad is a good lord. She like a 2/4 body is solid, and she turns so many rolls terrifying. You have to be a little careful, and I love the play of like if you suit up your opponent's creature with rolls, put a monster roll on one, a roll on another, and start draining them. That's great, but then be careful because if they kill Ariad, all the creatures are just a little bit better. Apprentice's Folly. This card would be better in another set. There's not a ton of enters the battlefield effects compared to other sets. You can make 2 reflections and then bargain away the Apprentice's Folly. I'm raising it. I should be a 3 with a 4 of a 2 because of that. But like, if you can make 2 tokens and then Apprentice it away, that's solid. It's pretty good. But you also have to have 2 creatures in play that you care about copying first. That's a little bit harder. Solid, fun thing to build around. Raising the ceiling. Bronzebane Troll, just nuts. It's a 4 mana 5/5 that lets you kill a creature that is a 3/3 or sacrifice a creature that is a 4/4, which you can then do again every time you play another role on the Fonzbane Troll. It's also a way to sacrifice an enchantment on demand for all of the black cards that care about enchantments dying. And like a 4-mana 5/5 trample is just good enough on its own. Card is very powerful when it's better. Like compared to the other multicolored cards, it's a little ridiculous. Goose Mother. Your worst case scenario is a 2-mana 2/2. Your best case scenario is a 10-mana 10/10 that makes 5 food or 4 foods. But like, you do want to have other access to other food. But the card is just very efficient and something you're pretty happy to splash for. I'm raising the teeth. Alright. Yeah, there's not a ton to say about this card. Like, it's usually just going to be a huge creature that gains you life and draws you some cards and flies. Which is a lot. It's a good card. Balloon of Grand Squall. Card's a lot harder to work with than I thought. 3 mana is prohibitively difficult, and you usually will have to choose one of these sides or the other. But like, if you can pay 5 mana to draw 3 cards and then play 3 mana 4/4, you're happy. If you can just pay 3 mana 4/4, that ramps you a little bit, you're happy. 3 colors are just tough in this set, or should be higher. Agatha's Soul Cauldron. I love this card. The threat of activate, like, ignore most of the text on it. There are a few abilities that you want to copy and give to your other creatures, but for the most part, you're happy to just instant speed, put a +1/+1 counter on your creature a few times. Like, if you can get 4 counters out of this, you're really happy, and you will often get more, and the graveyard hate aspect of it is relevant. We really just care about the last ability here. Exiling your opponent's whole graveyard is great, throwing all your creatures is great, having a 6, like, if you have 2 3/3s and your opponent has 1 3/3, then you can delay the decision, and whatever that threat of activation will keep them from blocking either of your 3/3. Just solid, and you take it reasonably high because it's an artifact. Hills Crown of Winter. I gave this the highest pick grade in the set because pack 1 pick 1 I don't think is a single card I'd take over. Situationally, I might take Bitter Blossom over it. I might take Force Fruition. But pack 1 pick 1, I don't think there's a single card I take over Hilda's Crown of Winter. It's got a 9 because I don't think you ever pass it, and it doesn't always win you the game when you play it, but it's very efficient. Really good tapper. It goes into 100% of the decks. Best in the blue-white decks, but like, you always take this card. Like, your worst case scenario is that it keeps a creature down every turn as removal, and is always keeping their best creature locked down. But you can also end step tap a creature, untap, tap a creature, sacrifice to draw 2 cards or 3 cards if they attack with the creature. Very good. The Ginger Meal Ender, efficient, 2 mana 3/1. You want to have treasures, or like a 2 mana 3/1 that sacrifices to gain food is solid. There's only 1 Planeswalker in the set, so the first line of text isn't really relevant. But in a dedicated treasure or food deck, it's just a lot of work on a very efficient, fast body. It is also nice having, so like, there's lots of pings in this set. Deal 1 damage, give a creature -1/-1. Rat Out is a card you want to be aware of. But if you have a treasure in play, then your opponent cannot ping Sir Ginger. You can leave it. The Iron Crag. A 2 mana mana rock is good in this set. Like, having a 2 mana card that is a land is great. With upside is even better. There aren't a ton of legendary creatures in this deck, but you can cram 2 or 3 legendary creatures into your deck without issue and be happy to play the Iron Crag. It does lose the ability to make mana, but like, a 3 mana +3/+3 equipment with equip 3 is better in the late game. And the Iron Crag is a pretty good equipment and mana rock. Alright, up next, we just have 5 lands, 1 sec. Oh, it's I guess I start with R. Alright, Restless Fortress. 3 mana 1/4. Like, 4 mana for a 1/4 is just okay. This is one of the weaker lands, but like, white-black is a better thing to be splashing in. You will use this for the colors more than a lot of the other lands. And like, a dual land that turns into a creature is just good, even if the stats on the creature are bad. Like, you'd play this if it were a tap land that made white or black, and being able to turn it into a 1/4 that gains a little bit of life, punches through. It's a solid finisher in the late game. It's nice. Yeah, I gave it a 5. The floor is a 4. The ceiling is a 6. Restless Spire. This one is the worst of the bunch overall, but blue-red is like colors you're happy to have, and it's much cheaper. Like, 4 mana versus 2 mana, like you will get to attack with the Restless Spire and hold up mana or play a spell in the same turn. And it's surprisingly difficult to block at the stage of the game that you're going to be attacking with it. But in general, the ones that are bigger tend to be better because you don't have time to activate your land creatures until after you've cast all your spells. Restless Cottage. This one just does a lot. It's good for this. Like it actually blocks compared to the others, but a 4/4 for 5, like at the stage of the game where you want this to be attacking, it does everything you want it to do, because it clears out your opponent's graveyard and makes a food, so it gains you some life. So like you could read it at, like you can turn that food into fresh cards. So it's worth more cards than the others. I gave it a higher rating than the first 2 lands. I gave it a 6 average. Restless Bivouac. So it just grows out of control. Like you can activate, as opposed to like the Witch's Cottage, which you want in the late game, or the Restless Spire, which you want in the early game. The Bivouac you tend to activate whenever you have time, because the more you get to attack with it, the harder it is to block. And against an empty board, late game, when things have stalled out, it's really a great finisher. And sometimes you'll just put this on a different creature. It doesn't have to put the counter on itself. You can put it on another creature. Very good land. Restless Vinestalk. So I said earlier, the ones that are for the late game are better in this format. And that's because so you'll play the Restless Vinestalk if you are a blue deck or if you are a green deck, and just use Crystal Grottos or Prophetic Prisms in order to activate it. You can attack with it as a 5/5, and even if your opponent has a 6/6 or a 7/7, you can turn it into a 3/3 that cannot block the Vinestalk. If they don't have that, you turn your 1/1 into a 3/3 and you hit for 8, and it wins the game. It's a very strong land. You play it on either half. I mean that. Like if you are a green deck or a blue deck, you still play the Vinestalk. Just hope to grab a Prophetic Prism. All right, that is it for today's rare and mythic set review. It's 10:45, so we will be calling it there. I'm going to get this uploaded as soon as possible up to YouTube. If you have any questions, be sure to let you know. Tomorrow night, instead of airing the rest of the set review, we are going to be going right into our Eldraine draft. So tomorrow night, as soon as I get home from work, it'll be a little bit on the later side, but we will right away start drafting some Wilds of Eldraine. We will put all of the things that I showed you in this set review into practice, and it's going to be a really good time. Thank you all so much for being here. I know it was late. I kind of do that on purpose for the set reviews, just because I like having a few people to talk to, but generally, like, having my flow broken up a little is fine. Having it broken up a lot is a little tougher. But thank you nonetheless. I was pretty happy you were here. Let's go see Troy. I haven't seen Troy in a little bit, and I want to say hello. You're welcome, Night Dark. Thanks for being here. I know it's late, but I also know you worked hard today, so I was glad that you could just come hang out. Thanks a lot. I'm really glad you could be here. All right, we're gonna go see Troy, be extra good to him. I will see everybody tomorrow night. It's gonna be a little late, but I really want to be able to draft this set. I'm so excited. But I'm glad we got all this done, because it means I get to start drafting tomorrow night. I'll be working on my primer tomorrow. We'll get it up as soon as possible, and all of these ratings are going to be up soon. I'll have this uploaded tomorrow as well. Good night, everybody.
Welcome in. How was your stream? Hello, Scuffle. Hello, Raiders. Hope you're all doing well. Very heavily blue-red this. I think there's all just felt like this pack is very great for us. We're just gonna take the transmuter here, I think.